Ron, when did the Joplin tornado first come into your consciousness? Was it watching the news that evening, May 22nd,
Yes,
2011?
came right on. There it was, and close by, an hour north.
So you were in Northwest Arkansas at the time?
Yes.
So you're aware that Joplin is hit by a tornado, but then you actually get involved and stay involved for months.
Well,
So how did that connection
yeah, the next
happen?
morning, when it was light, they had a more ability to assess better.
Yeah.
And when I realized how bad it was, I got in the car the next day,
You
drove
did?
up there. And
By
this
yourself?
I did.
Really?
Yeah.
Why did you do that?
Well, I knew I had a background in relief and development. Even though I was a strategy consultant, I had spent many times doing that. Oh, I did the flood of '93 in St. Louis too, on an 8-week retainer.
Oh, is
So
that
I've done several of those World Vision pieces since I was on staff. So anyway, I jumped in the car and drove up because first of all, I wanted to see what would happen.
Sure.
And the first thing I saw, I went right to the area, and it was, as it was reported, it was 1 mile wide, and about 6 miles long.
Yeah.
And I went to the place. It was near the Walmart store that was only partially damaged, but they had to rebuild it anyway. There were 2 Walmarts, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I stood on the ground and could see nothing above 6 feet tall.
Wow.
And there'd been
Through the
trees,
Walmart.
buildings, and so, well, next to Walmart there,
Oh,
but,
okay,
but
yeah.
the 1 mile swath.
Oh, yeah.
And I looked out, and the world was 6 foot high. And anything
Yeah.
above 6 feet was gone. And
Wow.
just houses off and everything. And so I drove through. They hadn't set up security yet. And so I drove through some of the areas, and I said, this is going to be bad. This is really bad. And it was during that time where there'd been a tornado in, I believe, Alabama.
Tuscaloosa.
Tuscaloosa.
Not long before.
Smaller one in Kentucky. And I knew World Vision. I called them up, and I know they were responding to each one of those. And so I said, do you need help here in Joplin? Because it was the largest one. It was the biggest one.
Yeah.
And they'd already deployed a lot of their staff and resources. And so the manager, she came from Dallas, and she had to get up there to assess too, and I met her. She was already on her way, so when I went up in the morning, I met her in the afternoon at the restaurant at Denny's.
In Joplin.
In Joplin. And we
Wow.
talked.
Yeah.
And I gave my resume, and she had not, obviously from '84 to 2000 was not her time in World Vision. And I said, if you need help, I'd like to jump in.
Wow.
I said, well, we only have one person, that'd be you. And I said, okay, and drove home and said, okay, we need to figure this out.
What to do?
What to do.
Wow. So the tornado happens. The next day, you're in the car. You drive from where you were at the time, about an hour north to Joplin.
Yes.
Right? And then, I mean, within 24 hours or less, you've
Day
got an
2.
agreement.
Day 2, I'm on the ground. Yeah. Hired.
With World Vision, and
Yes.
you had worked with World Vision in the past. There are actually a few things I want to ask you about just in that very first meeting there, or that your first experiences in Joplin. But just real quick, what are some of the things you had done with World Vision?
Yes.
In your experience with them?
Well, in the mid-'80s, '84 to '87, I was director of relief for Asia, Latin America. And so we had a team of 10 of us at the headquarters, but we worked through the national leadership in each of the countries in Asia. And so we did, just not in any particular order, but we did typhoon in Bangladesh, volcano in Philippines.
Yeah.
We did a volcano out in Colombia, Armero, a town of 30,000 completely buried, 20 feet in lava, nothing there left. That was an interesting challenge. We had a children's hospital in Cambodia. We built a children's, it was a clinic, but then we were able to build a hospital. It serviced over 200,000 children a year.
Wow.
Worked in Pakistan with Afghan refugees, which that camp has been there for 25 to 30 years. 2 million refugees in northwest Pakistan.
Wow.
And so we had medical, food programs.
And then Afghanistan, you were in Afghanistan not long after 9/11, right?
Yes, I went in February 2002,
Now, was that also with World Vision?
World Vision.
Yeah.
It was a temporary assignment. They threw their staff in there.
Yeah.
They had a person that was very skilled in development, but it wasn't a development project. It needed to move very quickly. And so when I got there, I went right to the World Food Program.
Yeah.
And World Vision does 10% of all the world food programs around the world. So I already knew I had an open door. I knocked on the door, went in, they said, "Oh, you're World Vision, which 10% do you want?" And I said, "I want the area that's the furthest out and the hardest to get to."
So you've got all this experience when you arrive in Joplin, and you're able to talk about this stuff at Denny's in Joplin with this person.
Yes, indeed.
So she knows you've got the credentials. When people see new things, I think often, without thinking about it, we try to link it to other experiences. And when, a lot of folks I talk to, when they, first see the damage, you hear language like mind-boggling, unbelievable, because they have no other experience to really latch it to.
Yes.
How about you? When you look at that swath of destruction and you see that anything higher than 6 feet's been leveled, cars, I imagine you're seeing cars flipped over and all that.
Yep.
How did that figure in with all the past experiences you'd had? You'd mentioned typhoon, volcano.
Yes.
These difficult
Well, it's the
things.
same feeling. It's kind of, you're in awe. You're just, you are, as an engineer, former engineer, student, you think about all the energy that's been expended to destroy, and then the lives that have been impacted. But after you've done that, at that initial, you say, well, let's go to work. Let's get to work. What do we need to do here?
And you really knew that wasn't an abstraction for you. I mean, because you had had all this experience with rebuilding and.
Well, every
that kind of
disaster has a different type of response. Floods are different than hurricanes and tornadoes, which are different from famine, which are different from, and so the destruction and what you do, what you lay out to do. But your first priority is, how do we stop life-threatening situations? You're not worrying about repair. You're not worried about anything. You assess the resources, and of course, wherever you are in the United States, the communities and cities are on this like bees on honey. They've got the electric power, they've got the water. Those things have to come into play.
Yeah.
But then the people that are displaced or heavily damaged, they're normally, you have that opportunity. So you say, what's the immediate need? What risks are there? What groups of people are at risk?
Yeah.
And then what are the resources?
Yeah.
And so you do a gap analysis that says, well, this looks like this group's going to do this, looks like this group, because they all specialize. World Vision is a generalist. So we walk in and say, well, if that's being taken care of here, and that's being here, we'll work with them, but here's a gap here. And we'll go, that's where we're going to be.
So that's the gap analysis.
And then you join the group and the team. They start daily briefing meetings. All the NGOs get together every morning and report on what they found and what the needs are. And some groups have resources that others don't. And then you move forward like that.
And did that happen in Joplin?
It did.
Did the NGOs and the churches just kind of immediately?
Yeah, well, the NGOs met, and then churches joined because they didn't have that experience, but they're invited to join. Not all participated, but those that did wanted to know what to do. And they had facilities, they had people, and they had access to dollars too. We had access to dollars. But they wanted to know how to do this because it never happened to them before.
What NGOs were there? There's World Vision, you're with World Vision. What others were
World
there?
Vision, Samaritan Purse came. Convoy.
Convoy of Hope.
Some of the national ones, they were local. And
Habitat for Humanity, I think.
They were. They came
later
later because building houses comes after meeting immediate needs.
Yeah.
While people need food, water, and shelter immediate, you're not going to start any building projects.
Right.
But once you get through that phase of about 3 to 6 weeks, then you move out of relief and you move into rehabilitation. It's called restoration. And those are rebuilding houses and infrastructure and all that.
Wow.
So, and Joplin was located at the intersection of 4 interstates. And so stuff came in from the north, the south, the out of St. Louis area, and from the west.
How long was it before, I mean, so the storm hits the evening of the 22nd, you're there the next day. Is it already the next day that stuff begins
Already,
to pour into
Red Cross comes out of nowhere, American Red Cross. NGOs were like myself. I was there the next day, and the manager from Dallas already knew she had to get up there. She didn't know what she was going to do, but it was major. She had already committed to these other 2 tornadoes, and realized Joplin was larger than the other 2, and she'd already committed staff, and she had a warehouse in Dallas of building supplies and water and all that. Well, it was all being sent out. She came up and said, "I don't have very much left." I said, well, that's going to alter what we do. If I'm the only person and we don't have a lot of immediate resources, that means we'll partner. And we had money. We raised money. So we could partner with churches and say, what are you doing here? And they said, well, if we could buy this, and we got volunteers do this. And I'd say, great, we'll fund that part. Then as we got out of the relief area into rebuild, she had building supplies in Dallas. So I set up a semi-trailer on the parking lot of one of the churches there, rented a forklift for 2 months, and went into the building construction business of supplies.
Wow. And
so I would do surveys. I'd use volunteers from other churches to go out and look at neighborhoods and say, what are they doing? There'd be carpenters out there, and there'd be people doing work. And one say, well, we're all done, but we need a roof. So we had roofing material, so we'd send that over there. And then you go out again. So you kept, when I had, I'll tell you who, John Hampton, he's president and owner of First Western Bank in Rogers. He came up and said, I got a day and I can give, what can I do? I said, I need a scout. Drive here, 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 and find out what the needs are. What's going well, what's not going well, and what can we do? So he spent the whole day, came back with the notes and said, here, I gotta go home, but here's 3 areas, here's what I found. He goes.
Wow.
Then I know what to do next.
Yeah, one of the things that's really come out of these discussions I'm having is, and maybe somebody has written this book, I'm not aware of it, or maybe somebody is writing this book, but just a fascinating story of private actors. You've got the NGOs, but you've got churches, you've got individuals, just this incredible story of citizens just converging on this place. How long was it before, so the NGOs are on the ground immediately?
Within 2 to 3 days, it's like a tent city, not a tent city, but they're all set up in one would take a building that was empty and they turn that into what they were going to do. I just had a small office, maybe this size, at one of those large churches. That's all I had, because I was out all the time.
The church set you up?
Yeah.
Did you see these scenes? I heard a great story about a guy who came up from Texas, and he's a professional barbecuer, which I didn't know that existed. But he said, I'm a professional barbecuer, where can I get plugged in? And the church plugged him in, and he's there in a parking lot just barbecuing and giving people food.
All right, give me the tour, Haley. What you got?
What?
Give me the tour. What do you got?
All right, we got grills. We got a little bit of ribs over here.
You got some ribs and some assorted meats.
Yes, we have pork chops.
What do you think? Best in the state?
Oh, best in the country.
Best. Oh, that's a pretty bold statement.
I don't know.
Got Joe here,
that.
Master Griller.
Yeah, that's me.
Joe Jr., Master Loafer. So we're good to go.
Huh?
So we're good to go, right?
Yeah.
Here they come.
We have all the stuff right here. Around the world. Singing all around the world.
Did you see that kind of thing? Just
all
folks
over.
just showing up and saying, I've got a hammer, that's all I know how to do. But
well, and that's what you do. We set up a center at one of the churches, which became a hub for others. In other words, to coordinate volunteers. And they weren't in charge, but they said, and then who was it? Red Cross said, we'll bring food, sandwiches, to this place every day for lunch. So as volunteers came in, they got work assignments. Nobody's ordering them to do anything. And as World Vision, I had no staff and no charter, except I was here to help too, and help at the level of strategy and implementation and financial resources. And so that was what I brought to the table. So when I sat at the table, then they would go around and this is what's needed. And then when I transitioned to building supplies, I said, we've got shingles, we've got siding, we've got plywood. And they said, well, we've got a house over here. I said,
Yeah.
great, bring a pickup with the
Yeah.
flatbed at the back. I'll load it on with the forklift.
Yeah.
Off it went. And then when I ran low, I'd call Dallas and say, send me out what you have.
Yeah.
So it was emergency relief, which is stopping life-threatening situations. Then you move to rehabilitation, which is restoration, and then you move to development, which means you take it beyond where it was before.
Yeah.
And the city now, there's still signs of that up there. Some people, they lost their homes, flattened them. They took the insurance payment, cleared the lot, took the insurance payment for the house, sold the lot, and it gave them a capital base to go move to another place.
Sure.
They've been thinking about it, and so they turned disaster into opportunity. Others took the money and they started to rebuild.
Yeah.
But I think you can still drive down streets in Joplin and find empty lots
I think so.
because the houses are
that's
gone
right.
and the lots have never been rebuilt.
That's
So,
right. It's I mean, it sounds like a really interesting story in in relation to just how people can organize things without any. It doesn't sound like there's like one single person
No.
who's in charge.
No.
People are just collaborating,
Yes.
and it's I don't know what the right.
Well, they're in
like
charge
a
of their
honeycomb
own
of
piece.
collaboration or something like that.
They're in charge of their own piece.
Yeah.
If the convoy
Yeah.
is supposed to be bringing in water,
Yeah.
that's where you go for water. It's a long day, so you're just
Sure.
dead tired.
Sure.
But,
But it's meaningful.
it is, and you're with people, and the church, each church would have a person they put in charge of their own personal
Right.
response. The large church, where I had a small office, they opened up their church for
Sure.
like 4 weeks to 5 weeks to bring in all the relief supplies.
Right.
So you could walk down the aisles and it'd be clothes here, water there.
I remember
Finally,
seeing
after
that.
4 weeks, they said, this is really, slowing us down. We can't meet for church and all. So they went out and got a warehouse and rented it for 2 months.
Yeah.
So I drove forklift there on Saturdays for them,
Moving stuff.
to
Yeah.
load trucks and all.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So you've mentioned churches a number of times, and what difference? And Joplin is, I think, safe to say, compared to other parts of the country, a pretty churched population, right? You've got a lot of churches and a
in the Bible Belt.
number of big churches. In the Bible
Yes.
Belt. What? So, as a sort of a thought experiment, how would the experience have been different if the tornado had hit an area where there weren't that many churches, there weren't that many big churches, there
Yeah.
wasn't much of a, the population was much less church. So I guess the
Yeah.
question really is, you've got the NGOs that go in, how vital were the local churches themselves in really making it work?
Well, they were the fuel for the engine.
Yeah.
Without volunteers, it's just you and a few staff. It's convoy that brings in the semis. What are they going to do with all this stuff? They're truck drivers.
Yeah.
They got their forklifts. Said, where do you want this stuff? We got to get back. We got to go get more.
Yeah.
And so, it was so vital. So I think if you see that, and you've seen it a lot in Arkansas, where these tornadoes will hit these small little villages, the whole village will turn out and help these people clean out their houses and try to figure out how to help. But that's the only answer.
Did you see that a lot of the volunteerism was church-based? Would you say that most of it was church-based?
It was.
Like overwhelmingly church-based, do you think?
Overwhelmingly.
The volunteerism?
Yeah, the NGOs were there, and not all were Christian NGOs, but they relied on volunteers to come to execute what they were going to do.
Yeah.
Like if you set up a place to distribute water, it gets stacked out of the truck. You've got to figure out how you're going to distribute it, how to cover it up at night, who's coming to get it, and that NGO or that team may only be 2 or 3 people. So they really depend on a dozen more to join with them.
Yeah.
And
I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about, so we've been hearing about all of this private activity. We've got local government, and then I'm sure states involved somehow, but local government obviously, and then FEMA comes in. So I'm interested in hearing, how do things go with, And I'm not implying that there was any tension, but how did
No.
that relationship work with local government? And then I'm imagining FEMA's on the scene pretty quickly too.
Well, FEMA is there, and they bring a lot of equipment, which is
Yeah.
useful. They're also providing funding for the long-term response.
Like housing people. and
Housing
things
people,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Yeah.
They're limited in what they do because they don't have the volunteers. You know, they come in as a government staff. They're all there. They've got a vital role to play, but their job is the same as the rest of our jobs. What resources are here, what is needed, and who's going to do it. FEMA doesn't do a lot of their own work. They depend on NGOs. So does World Food Programs.
Really?
So does USAID. People don't know that.
So
it's-
when FEMA comes in, it's not okay. Uncle Sam's here and Uncle Sam's in charge. It's
No.
Uncle Sam is part of
Yeah, it's
a
part
very
of-
complex
Yes.
response.
And they have obviously the tie to the federal funds, and that's all worked out with the local government. NGOs aren't involved in that. So
Yeah.
whatever, if the president declares it a disaster area, then really the channel is from the federal through the state
Yeah.
to the local. And so whatever that emergency looks like. But
Yeah.
they don't do food, they don't do water, they don't do emergency medicine, but they will help coordinate. They're great coordinators, and
Yeah.
they're great gatherers of resources. So
How about the city government, where they pretty much just do what you're going to do? And
well, we'd coordinate with them. They'd have a
Yeah.
representative at the NGO meeting, and they had a disaster point person from the city. Now he or she, when she walked out of the room, she had all the connections to roads, to water, to electric, to all that. So that one person, became. And then the NGOs we didn't have to propose. We would just say what we're going to do, and they kept saying thanks, because we don't have the people, and we've got our own infrastructure to get back.
Sure.
And then Walmart shows up and says, "Wow, this building is almost gone." They declared that a disaster. So the next thing you know, Walmart is working with the city to get permits to tear down the building and get it rebuilt. And so a lot of that's going around, and we're dealing with pretty much on individual people, individual homes.
yeah.
And so the other organizations are dealing with this stuff that we wouldn't have the ability or the funding to do. I mean,
Right.
it takes millions to put your electric system back, and
Right.
hundreds of thousands, and your water system is damaged.
Yeah.
And now you have all these displaced people that hopefully got out of their apartments before it got flattened. You have all these homes that are in various stages of disrepair. Some
Sure.
major, some minor,
Yeah.
some totally flattened.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've answered this question, but let me just ask it directly. Just as another thought experiment, take the NGOs and the volunteers out, and all Joplin has is government response.
Yes.
What difference does that make?
Well, difference makes that they will handle the infrastructure, but I don't see how they'd be able to handle home to home, cleaning out, repairs. There's too many of them.
Yeah, you're talking about.
It overwhelms the city staff. I mean, they wouldn't have. It's not their mission.
It would still be going 12 years later. I mean, all of the clearing of the debris.
Well, I don't know
and
how
all
long it
that
would
stuff.
go,
Yeah.
but people would figure it out, I guess, over time. But
Yeah.
you're trying to get this thing underway
Yeah.
and get people back to a sense of normality. Although I don't know how you do that when you've totally lost everything you own.
Yeah.
On your house, you'll find there are lots of groups. Like I ran into Amish carpenters, 4 of them, and they had just picked out 2 houses, and they said, "We're going to stay here till these 2 houses are done." And they ran out of some siding, and also I, was able to say, "Hey, send a pickup with your flatbed over." And oh, you got siding? What color is it? Well, I said, "I have several colors." Okay, so they go, "We'll take this, this, and this."
Yeah.
But they just chose 2 houses, probably spent 6 weeks there, went home.
Yeah. Well, that's
know.
it really is amazing. You've got all these stories. Another story of a guy who said, "Look, I can sharpen what do you call it? The saws, the chainsaws."
Yeah.
So he just goes around
Yeah.
sharpening chainsaws. That's what he
You
does.
see that a lot in tornadoes where they're doing like the teams are going in to cut down trees, off from the houses and all.
sure.
There's always somebody there going around to do the saws, yeah. But you go in there and you find out what you can do,
Sure.
And I kept asking all the time, every day I was there, and then it was not like I left them, but I was actually working with 5 or 6 churches, even
Yeah.
though my little central office was in one of the larger ones,
Mm.
and they had the warehouse. But then I was able to tell the smaller churches, the large church has this warehouse. Oh, well, what's in it? Well, there's water buckets, there's insulation, there's flour. I mean, so then the other church, that large church, would invite them in, because it doesn't do any good to hang on to this stuff.
Right.
And it didn't cost anything because it was all donated.
It's all donated.
And so that's the whole
So much
economy.
came in.
But you can't rebuild a whole community on donations and short-term relief.
Yeah.
It gets it started, you get it going. Volunteers can only give so much time.
Right.
I can only give 10 weeks of the summer, but by that time it had all gone by, and I sent my forklift back, and they came and picked up the semi, and
Wow.
I was on my way. Now, was every house in Joplin repaired? No. Had all the plans been implemented? No. But the city had picked itself up and
Sure.
set itself down, and they had
Sure.
momentum, and they were moving.
Yeah.